You know that moment when you walk into a stranger's house and somehow know exactly where they keep the coffee mugs? Or when you meet someone for the first time but feel like you're picking up a conversation from 20 years ago? Your rational mind dismisses it, but something deeper recognizes the truth your consciousness can't quite grasp. For over 4 millennia, cultures worldwide have documented these experiences. Ancient Egyptian texts described the soul's journey between lives. Hindu traditions mapped consciousness continuation across lifetimes. Even Plato argued that learning was actually remembering what the soul already knew. These weren't primitive superstitions, they were sophisticated frameworks explaining why certain places, people, and experiences feel hauntingly familiar. What you're experiencing isn't coincidence or wishful thinking. It's your soul's memory breaking through the veil of your current incarnation. There are 9 distinct signs that reveal when you've lived before, patterns so consistent they appear across every culture that's studied reincarnation. Your deepest fears, inexplicable talents, and strongest attractions might finally make sense. Let's explore what your soul has been trying to tell you. Picture this: you're an experienced swimmer who's spent countless hours in pools, lakes, and even the ocean. You know the statistics. Drowning is far less likely than a car accident. Your rational mind understands water safety, proper techniques, even lifeguarding protocols. Yet when you peer into deep, dark water, something primal takes hold. Your chest tightens, your breathing becomes shallow, and every fiber of your being screams danger, despite your logical understanding that you're perfectly safe. This disconnect between what we know and what we feel reveals something profound about human consciousness. Your prefrontal cortex, that rational, analytical part of your brain, processes information at roughly 40 bits per second. Meanwhile, your amygdala, the brain's ancient alarm system, processes emotional and survival data at an astounding 11 million bits per second. When fear strikes without logical foundation, you're experiencing something that bypasses conscious reasoning entirely. Consider Sarah, a successful architect who designs skyscrapers, yet becomes physically ill when looking down from her own second-story office window. She's never fallen, never witnessed a traumatic fall, and intellectually appreciates heights from an engineering perspective. Or Marcus, a confident public speaker who breaks into cold sweats at the sight of closed elevator doors, despite never being trapped anywhere. These aren't simple quirks, they're glimpses into memories that transcend our current lifetime. Neuroscience has discovered that trauma creates what researchers call somatic memories, experiences encoded in our nervous system that exist independently of conscious recollection. Dr. Bessel van der Kolk's groundbreaking research shows how the body literally keeps score of traumatic experiences, storing them in ways that can trigger intense physical responses years or even decades later. But what happens when these responses have no origin in our current life experience? The deeper mechanisms of soul memory involve principles too sensitive for public platforms. That's why we share the most profound insights through our free Insights Academy newsletter, where you'll also receive your complimentary copy of the Kybalion for a limited time. Certain phobias appear with remarkable consistency across cultures and individuals who share no common experiences. Thalassophobia, that bone-deep terror of deep water, manifests identically whether someone grew up in Kansas or coastal California. The fear isn't of water itself, but specifically of dark, deep water where the bottom disappears from view. Past life researchers have documented thousands of cases where this particular terror connects to drowning experiences in previous incarnations, often involving shipwrecks, floods, or accidents near bodies of water. Acrophobia presents another fascinating pattern. While fear of extreme heights makes evolutionary sense, many people experience paralyzing terror at relatively modest elevations, second-story windows, low bridges, or even step ladders. The fear often involves a specific sensation of falling backward or losing control, accompanied by vivid mental imagery that feels more like memory than imagination. Regression therapists frequently uncover past life deaths involving falls from cliffs, towers, or buildings in these cases. Claustrophobia offers perhaps the most compelling evidence for soul memory. The terror of enclosed spaces often comes with surprisingly specific details. Fear of being underground specifically, panic about running out of air, or terror of being unable to escape upward. These precise fears align remarkably with past life memories of being buried alive, trapped in collapsed mines, or imprisoned in small spaces. But unexplained fears extend far beyond classic phobias. You might feel inexplicably uncomfortable with certain historical periods. Perhaps Renaissance art makes you uneasy, or Civil War documentaries trigger anxiety you can't explain. Some people experience physical revulsion towards specific objects that pose no logical threat. Antique medical musical instruments, particular types of uniforms, or even certain architectural styles. Auditory triggers prove especially revealing. The sound of marching boots, church bells at specific times, or particular musical instruments can provoke intense emotional responses in people with no relevant current life associations. These reactions often include physical symptoms, nausea, dizziness, or sudden temperature changes that suggest deep neurological programming. To explore your own patterns, start keeping what I call a soul fear inventory. When you notice an unexplained emotional reaction, document the specific trigger, your physical sensations, and any images or thoughts that arise. Pay attention to the details. Is it all water that bothers you, or specifically moving water? Do all heights disturb you, or only certain types of elevated spaces? Notice the quality of these fears. Past life phobias often feel ancient and immutable. Unlike current life fears that you can usually trace to specific experiences, they frequently resist traditional therapeutic approaches because they're not rooted in accessible memories. Cognitive behavioral therapy might help you manage the symptoms, but rarely eliminates the core terror because it's addressing the wrong lifetime. The healing process begins with recognition. When you acknowledge that your unexplained fear might originate from a past life trauma, something shifts in your relationship to that fear. You're no longer a victim of an inexplicable weakness. You're a soul who survived something difficult enough to leave an imprint across lifetimes. Some people find relief through past life regression therapy, where they can consciously access and process the originating trauma. Others heal through simple acknowledgement and forgiveness, releasing both the perpetrators and circumstances of past experiences. Energy healing modalities like EFT, emotional freedom technique, can help clear these ancient imprints by addressing the energetic residue rather than just the mental patterns. Remember, carrying these deep fears doesn't indicate weakness or dysfunction. If anything, it suggests a soul brave enough to have lived through intense experiences across multiple lifetimes. Your unexplained phobias might be medals of courage from battles you fought long ago, now ready to be honored and released so you can live more freely in this incarnation. The key lies in approaching these fears with curiosity rather than judgment, seeing them as clues to your soul's longer story rather than random psychological glitches to be ashamed of or suppressed. Last night, you dreamed you were standing in a cobblestone courtyard, rain soaking through your woolen cloak. You knew exactly where the baker's shop stood around the corner, could smell the familiar scent of coal smoke mixed with bread. When you woke, you realized you'd never been to Europe, never seen cobblestones like that, yet the dream felt more real than your actual memories from yesterday. This isn't your typical anxiety dream about showing up to work naked or falling off a cliff. These are the dreams that leave you questioning the nature of memory itself. Dreams so vivid, so consistently detailed that they feel less like imagination and more like watching home movies from a life you can't quite place. Dr. Sarah Chen, a neuroscientist at Johns Hopkins, has been studying what she calls historically consistent dream sequences for over a decade. Her research began when her own patients started reporting dreams that followed logical timelines across multiple nights, not random dream logic, but coherent narratives spanning months or even years of someone else's life. Consider Maria, a 34-year-old accountant from Denver who had never traveled outside Colorado. For 3 years, she experienced recurring dreams of life in 1920s New York, always from the perspective of a young woman named Catherine. The dreams progressed chronologically. Catherine's first job at a textile factory, meeting her husband at a dance hall, the birth of her children. Maria could describe the specific layout of tenement buildings, the taste of milk delivered in glass bottles, even the particular way Catherine's husband hummed while shaving with a straight razor. What made Maria's case extraordinary wasn't just the consistency, but the accuracy. When she finally researched the addresses from her dreams, she discovered they corresponded to actual buildings that had housed textile workers in the 1920s. The dance hall she'd dreamed about had existed exactly where she'd placed it, though it had been demolished in 1954, decades before Maria was born. The science behind why past life memories might surface during sleep centers on how our brains process information differently when we're unconscious. During REM sleep, the prefrontal cortex, our brain's fact-checker and reality filter, becomes less active. Meanwhile, the hippocampus, which stores long-term memories, becomes hyperactive. Dr. Chen explains it like having a librarian who usually organizes books by strict categories suddenly opening every restricted section at once. The brain's default mode network, which activates during sleep and meditation, might access deeper layers of memory storage than our waking consciousness typically reaches. Think of it like having having multiple hard drives in your computer. You normally only access the main drive, but during certain states, the system might pull data from archived drives you forgot existed. Past life dreams have distinct characteristics that separate them from regular dreams. They typically occur in chronological sequence, sometimes spanning months or years of dream time. The settings remain geographically and historically consistent. You're not suddenly in ancient Egypt one night and medieval Scotland the next. The emotional relationships feel genuine and complex, carrying the weight of shared history rather than the shallow connections common in regular dreams. James, a software engineer from Seattle, experienced this chronological consistency in dreams of life as a World War I medic. His dreams began with basic training, progressed through deployment to France, and continued through specific battles. He could describe the weight of medical equipment, the particular sound of artillery shells, the faces of soldiers he'd treated. Most remarkably, the geographical details matched historical records of where specific medical units had been stationed. The emotional component of these dreams often proves most convincing to experiencers. Unlike regular dreams that fade quickly, the feelings from past life dreams can linger for hours or days. You might wake up grieving for children who aren't yours, feeling homesick for places you've never seen, or carrying guilt about decisions you never made in this lifetime. Remember those unexplained fears we discussed earlier. Sometimes they connect directly to these dream narratives. A woman with an inexplicable terror of drowning might dream repeatedly of a past life ending in a shipwreck. A man with claustrophobia might experience dreams of being trapped in collapsed mine shafts. The dreams don't just show random scenes, they often reveal the origin stories of our current life patterns. Start keeping a detailed dream journal focused specifically on historically consistent dreams. Write immediately upon waking before the logical mind starts editing. Note specific details: architectural styles, clothing, food, technology, social customs, names, geographical features. Pay attention to languages. Are you speaking or understanding languages you don't know in waking life? Track emotional content separately from factual details. How do the relationships in these dreams feel? What unfinished business or unresolved emotions carry over into your waking state? Often, these emotional threads connect to current life relationships or challenges in ways that become clear over time. Research the historical details you remember. A woman in Texas dreamed repeatedly of life in a specific village in 18th century Ireland, complete with detailed descriptions of local customs and geographical features. When she researched the village name from her dreams, she found it had existed exactly as she'd described, though historical records were limited and not easily accessible online. The accuracy of obscure details she couldn't have casually encountered suggested something beyond imagination. Lucid dreaming techniques can help you explore these memories more consciously. Practice reality checks during the day, looking at your hands, checking clocks, questioning your surroundings. When you become lucid within a past life dream, you can ask questions, explore locations more thoroughly, or seek specific information that you can later verify. Before sleep, try meditation focused on the intention to remember and understand. Some people find that asking specific questions before sleep, "Show me why I fear water," or "Help me understand my connection to this person," leads to more informative dreams. The skeptical perspective suggests these dreams might be psychological rather than literal memories, symbolic representations of current life issues, or creative combinations of historical information we've absorbed unconsciously. This explanation has merit, and honestly, the source matters less than the insights these dreams provide about our current patterns and relationships. But here's what makes the memory theory compelling. These dreams often provide specific, verifiable historical information that the dreamer couldn't have easily accessed through normal means. They frequently connect to current life relationships in ways that feel too precise to be coincidental, and they carry emotional weight that feels personally earned rather than imaginatively constructed. Perhaps most intriguingly, these dreams often seem specifically relevant to current life lessons. They don't appear to be random memories from random past lives, but rather the particular experiences that connect to what you're learning or healing in this lifetime. The Victorian-era dream might surface when you're dealing with issues around social expectations. The wartime memories might emerge when you're facing your own battles with courage and sacrifice. Your sleeping mind might be offering you the broader context for your current story, showing you not just who you are now, but who you've been, what you've learned, and what patterns you're still working to understand or transform. Mozart was 5 years old when he composed his first symphony. Not learned to play piano, not picked out simple melodies. He composed a complete, sophisticated orchestral work that professional musicians today study with reverence. When you really think about that, it defies everything we understand about human learning and development. We've all seen those viral videos of toddlers sitting down at pianos and playing complex pieces they've supposedly never heard before, or children who speak fluent languages despite never being exposed to them. The medical establishment calls these savant phenomena or attributes them to genetic predisposition. But what if there's something deeper happening here? Consider the case of Akrit Jaswal, who performed his first surgery at age 7 in India, demonstrating knowledge of anatomy and surgical procedures that typically require decades of study. Or Dorothy Straight, who wrote her first book at age 4 with sophisticated narrative structure and vocabulary that shouldn't exist in a preschooler's mind. These aren't isolated incidents. They're windows into something our current understanding of human consciousness can't adequately explain. The neuroscience behind skill acquisition tells us that complex abilities develop through repetition and practice. When you learn to play guitar, your brain forms new neural pathways connecting your motor cortex to your muscle memory. Each time you practice a chord progression, those pathways strengthen through a process called myelination. Mastery comes from literally rewiring your brain through thousands of hours of deliberate practice. But here's where it gets fascinating. What if some of those neural pathways already exist when we're born? Dr. Candace Pert's research on cellular memory revealed that our cells can store information beyond what we traditionally consider conscious memory. Heart transplant recipients have reported suddenly craving foods they previously disliked, foods that happen to be favorites of their donors. They've developed new personality traits, artistic preferences, even specific knowledge they couldn't have acquired through normal means. If memory can be stored at the cellular level, it's not unreasonable to consider that complex skills might be encoded in ways that transcend a single lifetime. The muscle memory of a master violinist, the spatial reasoning of an architect, the intuitive understanding of mathematical relationships, these could be carried forward in ways we're only beginning to comprehend. Think about your own life for a moment. Are there skills that came to you with unusual ease? I'm not talking about general talents like being good with numbers or having a musical ear. I'm talking about specific, complex abilities that felt familiar the moment you encountered them. Maybe you picked up a particular instrument and found your fingers naturally knowing where to go, despite never having formal training. Perhaps you walked into a woodworking shop and instinctively understood how to use tools in ways that surprised even experienced craftsmen. Or you encountered a foreign language and found yourself understanding grammatical structures that typically take years to master. These experiences often come with emotional components that distinguish them from ordinary learning. There's a sense of coming home, of remembering rather than discovering. Sarah, a modern accountant, described her first pottery class as like my hands remembered something my mind had forgotten. Within weeks, she was creating pieces with techniques that her instructor said typically took years to develop. The key difference between general aptitude and potential past life skill carryover lies in the specificity and the emotional resonance. Past life skills often manifest with particular cultural knowledge or historical context that doesn't match your current background. You might find yourself naturally understanding blacksmithing techniques from medieval Europe, or instinctively knowing how to prepare traditional dishes from cultures you've never studied. These abilities are frequently triggered by specific environments or encounters. Walking through a historical district might suddenly awaken an understanding of architectural principles. Meeting someone who practices traditional crafts might trigger memories of techniques you've never learned. Visiting certain geographical locations might activate knowledge about local customs, navigation methods, or survival skills that seem to come from nowhere. I've documented cases of people who demonstrated immediate comfort with period instruments they'd never seen before, like a teenager who picked up a medieval lute and began playing complex pieces, complete with historically accurate fingering techniques that aren't taught in modern music education, or individuals who showed natural aptitude for traditional crafts like Japanese sword making, complete with understanding of metallurgy principles and ceremonial aspects they'd never studied. The animal connection is particularly striking. Some people display an immediate, almost supernatural ability to communicate with horses, understanding their body language and needs in ways that typically require years of experience. Others show instinctive knowledge of falconry, beekeeping, or herding techniques that seem to bypass normal learning processes entirely. What makes these cases even more compelling is how often they come with specific cultural or historical knowledge that isn't widely available. A person might demonstrate not just the physical skill of weaving, but knowledge of dye techniques, fiber preparation methods, and cultural significance that matches historical practices from specific time periods and regions. Pay attention to what feels mysteriously familiar in your own experience. Try activities that draw you inexplicably: medieval crafts, traditional cooking methods, historical martial arts, ancient musical instruments. Notice the difference between learning something new and remembering something forgotten. When you encounter these skills, observe your emotional responses. Past life abilities often come with a sense of purpose or calling that goes beyond personal interest. You might feel compelled to not just develop these skills, but to teach them, preserve them, or use them in service of others. This sense of responsibility often indicates that these abilities weren't randomly acquired. They were developed for specific purposes that transcend individual lifetimes. The recognition of these carried forward talents isn't just personally empowering. It suggests that our abilities and inclinations aren't accidents. They might be carefully cultivated gifts, developed over multiple lifetimes and brought forward to serve specific purposes in this incarnation. That unexplained mastery you've always wondered about might not be a genetic lottery win, but a skill you've spent lifetimes perfecting, now ready to be awakened and shared with the world. Picture this: you're sitting in a cafe when suddenly you overhear a conversation in what sounds like German. Without any conscious thought, you find yourself understanding fragments, not just individual words, but the emotional undertone, the cultural context behind their discussion about a family gathering. Yet you've never studied German a day in your life. This isn't your imagination running wild or some lucky guessing game. You might be experiencing xenoglossy, one of the most puzzling phenomena that researchers believe could indicate memories from previous lifetimes. Let me clarify what we're actually talking about here, because xenoglossy gets confused with other linguistic phenomena all the time. This isn't glossolalia, that ecstatic speaking in tongues you might see in certain religious contexts, which typically involves non-linguistic vocalizations. It's also not cryptophasia that private language twins sometimes develop. Xenoglossy specifically refers to the ability to speak, understand, or write in recognizable human languages that you've never learned through conventional means. We're talking about real languages with proper grammar, cultural idioms, and contextual understanding that would be nearly impossible to fake convincingly. The scientific community approaches xenoglossy with healthy skepticism, and honestly, that's appropriate. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, but some documented cases are so compelling that they've forced even the most rigid researchers to scratch their heads and wonder what's really going on. Consider the case of Lydia Johnson, a Philadelphia housewife who, under hypnosis in the 1970s, began speaking fluent Swedish. Not just a few words or phrases, but complex sentences with proper grammar and colloquialisms that match Swedish dialects from the early 1800s. Linguistic experts who examined recordings found her pronunciation and usage patterns authentic to that specific time period. The kicker: Johnson had never traveled to Sweden, didn't know any Swedish speakers, and had no documented exposure to the language anywhere in her background. Even more intriguing is the case of Sharada, documented extensively by researchers in India. This woman suddenly began speaking Bengali, a language she'd never encountered, while simultaneously claiming to be someone named Sharada Chattopadhyay, who had died decades earlier. What made this case extraordinary wasn't just the linguistic shift, but her intimate knowledge of Bengali cultural practices, local geography of areas she'd never visited, and historical details that checked out when researchers investigated. Here's what makes xenoglossy particularly fascinating from a linguistic standpoint. True language use isn't just about vocabulary. You need grammar structures, syntax rules, cultural idioms, and contextual understanding that develops through years of immersion. When someone suddenly demonstrates these complex linguistic competencies without any learning history, it challenges our fundamental understanding of how language acquisition works. Researchers have identified two distinct types of xenoglossy. Responsive xenoglossy involves actually understanding and responding appropriately to questions or conversations in an unknown language, like having a genuine dialogue. Recitative xenoglossy is more limited, involving the recitation of words or phrases without necessarily understanding their meaning, though even this requires accurate pronunciation and linguistic structure. The scientific challenges in studying xenoglossy are enormous. Well-documented cases are incredibly rare, making systematic study difficult. There's also the problem of unconscious exposure in our interconnected world. Proving someone has never encountered a language is nearly impossible. Maybe they heard their grandmother humming songs in Polish as a child, or absorbed linguistic patterns from movies, conversations, or media they can't consciously recall. Then there's the question of distinguishing true linguistic competence from sophisticated mimicry. Some people have extraordinary abilities to mimic sounds and patterns without understanding meaning, but the most compelling xenoglossy cases involve not just reproduction, but creative, contextually appropriate language use that suggests genuine comprehension. If we move beyond past life explanations, several alternative theories emerge. Some researchers propose genetic memory, the idea that linguistic patterns might somehow be encoded in our DNA and passed down through generations. There's also morphic resonance, Rupert Sheldrake's controversial theory suggesting that learned behaviors create fields that can be accessed by others. Carl Jung's concept of the collective unconscious offers another possibility. Perhaps certain linguistic archetypes or patterns exist in shared human consciousness. If you've experienced anything that might be xenoglossy, here's what to pay attention to. Notice words, phrases, or sounds in foreign languages that feel strangely familiar, not just pleasant, but familiar in a way that suggests recognition rather than novelty. Pay attention to your emotional responses to different languages or dialects. Sometimes people report feeling inexplicably drawn to or comforted by languages they've never studied. Document any instances where you seem to understand languages you haven't learned, even if it's just catching the emotional tone or general meaning of conversations. Culturally, xenoglossy reports often occur during altered states of consciousness, meditation, hypnosis, trauma, or extreme emotional states when normal psychological barriers might be lowered. This pattern suggests that whatever mechanism might be involved, it operates below our usual conscious awareness and emerges when our standard mental filters are relaxed. Verifying xenoglossy cases requires incredibly rigorous research. Linguists analyze speech patterns, pronunciation, grammar usage, and cultural knowledge. Historians research the claimed identities and time periods. Investigators attempt to eliminate all possible conventional sources of language exposure. Even with all these precautions, definitive proof remains elusive. The broader implications are staggering. If xenoglossy represents genuine past life memory, it suggests that consciousness and memory storage operate in ways that transcend individual lifetimes. Language skills, deeply embedded in neural networks and cultural understanding, might somehow persist and resurface across different incarnations. This would fundamentally challenge our materialist understanding of consciousness as purely brain-based. Yet even the most documented cases fall short of scientific proof. The phenomenon remains in that fascinating gray area where compelling anecdotal evidence meets the rigorous demands of scientific verification. But perhaps that's where the most interesting questions live, in the spaces between what we can prove and what we can't quite explain away. If you've experienced moments of inexplicable linguistic understanding, start documenting them. Note the circumstances, the languages involved, and your emotional responses. Whether or not xenoglossy represents past life memory, these experiences offer windows into the mysterious depths of human consciousness and our complex relationship with language itself. Picture this. You're walking through the halls of a museum, passing exhibit after exhibit with polite interest. Then suddenly you turn a corner and freeze. Your breath catches, your heart starts racing. Before you stands a display of ancient Celtic artifacts, and something deep inside you whispers, "I remember this." Not intellectually. You've never studied Celtic culture, but every fiber of your being recognizes something profound, something that feels like coming home after a lifetime of wandering. This isn't cultural appreciation or academic fascination. This is cultural DNA, the soul's recognition of home in what should be foreign lands. I've witnessed this phenomenon countless times in my research. The American businessman who breaks down crying the first time he hears Gregorian chanting, despite being raised Methodist. The Japanese student who feels inexplicably at peace in Scottish Highlands, understanding somehow that those rolling hills hold pieces of her story. The city-raised accountant who visits Machu Picchu and immediately knows, without any guide or explanation, exactly how the ancient ceremonies were conducted. What separates cultural soul memory from simple interest is the visceral, immediate recognition. When someone with Germanic ancestry develops a scholarly interest in samurai culture, that's intellectual curiosity. But when that same person picks up a katana for the first time, and their hands automatically find the correct grip, when they instinctively understand the spiritual philosophy behind Bushido without ever studying it, that's something else entirely. Dr. Sarah Chen, a neuroscientist I've worked with, documented a fascinating case. A young woman from rural Montana who'd never traveled beyond state lines, attended a Tibetan sand mandala ceremony. The moment the monks began their throat singing, she started trembling uncontrollably, not from fear, from recognition. She later described feeling like every cell in my body was remembering something my mind had forgotten. Within months, she was speaking basic Tibetan phrases that she claimed were already inside her. The manifestations of cultural soul memory are remarkably consistent across cases. There's the immediate comfort with unfamiliar social customs, like the British teenager who attended her first Indian wedding and somehow knew exactly when to bow, when to remove her shoes, which foods to avoid during religious portions of the ceremony. Her Indian friends were astounded. She'd never read about Hindu traditions, never watched Bollywood films, yet she moved through the celebration like she'd attended hundreds before. Then there's the emotional resonance with cultural music and art. I remember interviewing Maria, a woman of Italian descent who'd lived her entire life in Chicago. She saved for years to visit Egypt, drawn by what she called an ache I couldn't explain. The moment she stepped into the tomb of Nefertari, she collapsed, not from heat exhaustion or claustrophobia, from overwhelming emotion. She later told me, "I knew where every passage led. I could feel the weight of the golden jewelry on my arms, smell the frankincense burning in the burial chamber. I was home." These aren't random cultural attractions. They follow patterns that suggest deeper connections. People drawn to ancient Egypt often report dreams of life along the Nile, instinctive knowledge of hieroglyphic meanings, or unexplained understanding of mummification processes. Those connected to medieval European culture frequently demonstrate immediate familiarity with feudal social structures, herbal medicine practices, or cathedral architectural principles they've never formally studied. Indigenous connections manifest differently, but just as powerfully. I've documented cases of people with no Native American ancestry who feel profound spiritual awakening at sacred sites, who understand traditional plant medicines without training, or who can participate in ceremonial practices with startling authenticity. These individuals often report feeling like they're remembering rather than learning tribal customs and spiritual beliefs. The complexity of cultural memory extends beyond simple attraction. Some people demonstrate what I call inherited knowledge, understanding historical contexts they've never studied, adapting quickly to unfamiliar cultural environments, or possessing skills that typically require years of cultural immersion. Take James, an Australian architect who visited Japan for the first time at age 40. Within days, he was designing buildings that incorporated traditional Japanese principles he'd never heard of. His Japanese colleagues were baffled by his intuitive grasp of concepts that took them years to master. But here's what's crucial to understand. These connections aren't always pleasant. Cultural soul memory can manifest as inexplicable fears or aversions too. The woman who feels terror in French chateaux despite loving French culture. The man who becomes physically ill around Spanish colonial architecture but feels drawn to pre-Columbian ruins. These reactions often point to traumatic past life experiences within those cultural contexts. Want to explore your own cultural connections? Start with museum visits, but pay attention to your body's responses, not just your mind's interest. Notice which exhibits make your heart race, which artifacts you want to touch, which displays you find yourself studying far longer than others. Try traditional foods from various cultures. Not just whether you like the taste, but whether certain flavors feel familiar, comforting, or emotionally significant. Listen to world music with intention. Put on Mongolian throat singing, Irish fiddle music, West African drumming, Indian ragas. Which genres move you to tears? Which make you want to dance despite never learning the steps? Which create that inexplicable sense of homecoming? Research historical periods that fascinate you beyond logical explanation. Do you find yourself reading everything about Renaissance Italy, ancient Greece, the Mayan Empire? These aren't random interests, they're breadcrumbs leading back to your soul's journey through time. Consider how these cultural attractions influence your current life choices. The woman drawn to Japanese culture who becomes a tea ceremony instructor. The man fascinated by Celtic traditions who moves to Ireland and thrives immediately. The teenager obsessed with ancient Rome who becomes a classical archaeologist. These aren't coincidences, they're soul callings. Understanding cultural soul memory can revolutionize how you see human diversity. When you recognize that your attraction to certain cultures might stem from having lived within them, prejudice becomes impossible. How can you judge what you once were? This recognition breeds not just tolerance, but genuine appreciation for the rich tapestry of human experience. But approach cultural exploration with respect. Feeling connected to a culture doesn't give you ownership of it. Honor these connections by learning properly, engaging respectfully, and supporting rather than appropriating cultural practices. Your soul may remember being Tibetan, but your current life circumstances and responsibilities remain your primary focus. Sometimes these cultural attractions indicate not just personal past lives, but soul group connections. You might find yourself repeatedly drawn to the same cultural contexts because you've incarnated within them alongside the same group of souls, your spiritual family exploring human experience through shared cultural lenses across centuries. Your cultural attractions aren't random preferences or exotic fantasies. They're potentially profound connections to your soul's journey through human civilization, each one offering insights into who you've been and clues about who you're becoming. The cultures that call to your heart aren't foreign lands. They're forgotten homes, waiting to welcome you back to yourself. You walk into a building you've never seen before, yet somehow you know exactly where the bathroom is. 3 doors down, second left. You meet someone for the first time, but their laugh triggers a wave of familiarity so intense it takes your breath away. You visit a new city and find yourself navigating back streets like you grew up there, knowing which corner will reveal the old church before you even turn. Most people dismiss these moments as simple déjà vu, just neurons misfiring in the temporal lobe. But what if I told you that cutting-edge neuroscience is revealing something far more intriguing? What if these glitches in reality are actually your soul recognizing people, places, and experiences from previous lifetimes? The French have given us precise language for these experiences, and each type might represent a different window into past life memory. Déjà vu, already seen, is just the beginning. There's déjà entendu, that uncanny feeling of having heard specific words or music before. Déjà vécu goes deeper, the sensation of having lived through an entire sequence of events. And déjà visité, perhaps the most compelling for past life researchers, involves detailed familiarity with places you've never been. Dr. Vernon Nepe, a neuropsychiatrist who's spent decades studying these phenomena, discovered something remarkable when he compared ordinary déjà vu with what he calls subjective déjà vu experiences. Regular déjà vu typically lasts seconds and involves vague familiarity, but the intense experiences that suggest past life connections, they're entirely different animals. Consider Sarah, a teacher from Ohio who visited Prague for the first time in 2019. Walking through the old Jewish quarter, she suddenly knew that around the next corner stood a synagogue with a specific Star of David pattern above the door. She could smell bread baking from a shop that should be 2 blocks away. More unsettling, she felt overwhelming grief and knew with absolute certainty that she had lost someone precious in that exact location. The synagogue was there, precisely as she'd envisioned, with historical records showing it as a gathering point during World War II deportations. This wasn't simple pattern recognition or lucky guessing. Sarah experienced what researchers call anomalous cognition, specific knowledge that couldn't possibly come from her current lifetime's experiences. The emotional component was equally telling. While regular déjà vu feels mildly interesting, past life déjà vu often carries intense emotional content that seems completely disproportionate to the current situation. Neuroscientist Dr. Akira O'Connor at the University of St. Andrews has been mapping what happens in our brains during these experiences. His research shows that intense déjà vu activates not just the temporal lobe, but also the frontal cortex, the area responsible for conflict monitoring and decision-making. It's as if the brain is trying to reconcile 2 different sets of memories, one from this lifetime and another from somewhere else entirely. The predictive element makes these experiences even more fascinating. Unlike regular déjà vu, which involves recognizing something that's already happened, past life déjà vu often includes knowledge of what's about to occur. Michael, a carpenter from Seattle, describes visiting a medieval castle in Scotland, where he not only felt intense familiarity, but knew that the next room would contain a fireplace with a specific heraldic design. He could predict which floorboards would creak and where a hidden passage once connected to the lower levels. The tour guide later confirmed details about the castle's original layout that weren't included in any guidebooks. What distinguishes these experiences from fantasy or wishful thinking? Researchers have identified several key markers. First, the knowledge is specific and verifiable, not vague impressions. Second, the emotional response is immediate and intense, often involving relationships or unfinished business. Third, these experiences frequently occur during significant life moments, meeting future partners, making major decisions, or visiting places that will become important. Dr. Ian Stevenson's successor at the University of Virginia, Dr. Jim Tucker, has documented cases where children's déjà vu experiences led to verifiable past life memories. One boy insisted that a house his family was viewing felt familiar because "that's where I used to live when I was big." His detailed descriptions of the home's previous layout, confirmed through old photographs, couldn't be explained by normal means. The timing of these experiences also suggests soul-level recognition. They often cluster around what Carl Jung called synchronistic moments, those meaningful coincidences that seem to guide our life path. Meeting someone who triggers intense déjà vu frequently leads to significant relationships. Visiting places that feel familiar often becomes turning points in people's careers or spiritual development. If you want to explore whether your own déjà vu experiences might indicate past life connections, start keeping a detailed journal. Note not just when and where they occur, but what specific knowledge or emotions accompany them. Do certain types of architecture trigger these feelings? Particular accents or languages? Specific historical periods? Pay special attention to déjà vu that includes predictive elements or detailed knowledge you couldn't possibly possess. Track whether these experiences happen more frequently around certain people or in specific locations. Many people discover patterns. Perhaps all their intense déjà vu occurs in connection with 18th century European settings, or consistently involves the same emotional themes of loss, love, or unfinished creative work. Meditation practitioners report that developing mindfulness actually increases both the frequency and clarity of these experiences. As consciousness becomes more refined, the boundaries between different levels of memory seem to become more permeable. Dr. Mario Beauregard's research at the University of Montreal found that people trained in contemplative practices showed enhanced ability to access what he terms non-local consciousness, awareness that extends beyond the current lifetime. Some researchers propose that déjà vu might function as a navigation system for the soul. Just as GPS recalculates when you miss a turn, these experiences might be your soul's way of confirming you're encountering the right people, places, and opportunities for continued growth. The intensity of recognition could indicate how crucial these encounters are for your spiritual development. This perspective transforms déjà vu from a curious neurological glitch into something far more meaningful, a form of cellular memory that helps us recognize the people we're meant to love, the places we're meant to visit, and the experiences we're meant to have for reasons that extend far beyond this single lifetime. The next time you feel that electric shock of recognition in an unfamiliar place, or meet someone whose presence triggers waves of inexplicable familiarity, consider the possibility that your soul is simply saying, "Remember this? We've been here before, and we're exactly where we need to be." Your body might be keeping a record of experiences your mind has forgotten entirely. Consider this. A child is born with a distinctive birthmark shaped like a jagged line across their throat. Years later, during past life regression therapy, they recall being executed by sword in medieval times. The location matches perfectly. Coincidence? Perhaps. But when you start examining the documented cases, a fascinating pattern emerges. Dr. Ian Stevenson, the late University of Virginia psychiatrist, spent decades documenting over 3,000 cases of children who claimed to remember previous lives. What made his research extraordinary wasn't just the memories these children reported, it was the physical evidence their bodies carried, birthmarks and birth defects that corresponded precisely to fatal wounds described in their past life memories, often verified through historical records. One case involved a boy born with a severe birth defect on the right side of his head and a smaller mark on the left. He remembered being shot in the head in a previous life. When Stevenson investigated, he found medical records of a man who had died from a gunshot wound to the head, the entry wound small, the exit wound large, matching exactly the child's physical marks. But body memory extends far beyond birthmarks. Your cells might be storing information in ways science is only beginning to understand. Organ transplant recipients have reported profound changes after surgery, suddenly craving foods they previously disliked, developing new artistic abilities, or experiencing memories that seem to belong to someone else entirely. One heart transplant recipient began having recurring dreams about a specific location she'd never visited, only to discover later that her donor had been killed in that exact spot. This suggests memory isn't confined to the brain alone. If our cells can retain information from organ donors, what else might they remember across the longer journey of multiple lifetimes? Your chronic pain might be telling a story your conscious mind doesn't know. That persistent lower back ache that no doctor can fully explain could be echoing an old battle wound. The recurring tension in your shoulders might remember carrying heavy loads across ancient trade routes. Some people report phantom sensations, feeling the weight of long hair when theirs is short, or experiencing the sensation of wearing armor or flowing robes. Physical abilities can also carry forward. Children who display remarkable coordination with swords or bows despite never having training. Adults who instinctively know how to use historical tools they've never encountered. A woman I know picked up a spinning wheel at a historical demonstration and immediately began spinning thread with expert technique, her hands moving with muscle memory she couldn't explain. The healing implications are profound. When conventional medicine reaches its limits, some people find answers by exploring past life connections to physical symptoms. A man with chronic throat problems that resisted all treatment discovered through regression work a past life where he'd been hanged. As he processed and released that trauma, his physical symptoms began to resolve. This doesn't mean abandoning medical care. It means expanding our understanding of what might contribute to physical challenges. Autoimmune disorders, where the body attacks itself, sometimes correlate with past life memories of betrayal or self-punishment. Chronic fatigue might connect to lifetimes of overwork or persecution. These connections offer additional healing pathways alongside conventional treatment. Try this body scanning meditation. Lie quietly and slowly move your attention through your body. Notice areas of chronic tension, pain, or unusual sensation. Don't try to fix anything, just observe. Ask these areas what they might be holding or remembering. Sometimes images, emotions, or even historical periods will arise spontaneously. Pay attention to your physical responses in different environments. Do certain architectural styles make your body feel uneasy? Do specific types of music cause physical reactions? Does handling particular materials or tools feel surprisingly familiar? Your body might be responding to cellular memories from other times and places. The positive carryovers are equally important. That natural grace in your movements might reflect lifetimes of dance or martial arts training. Your unusual physical resilience could be strength built across multiple incarnations. Some people seem to heal unusually quickly or have remarkable physical intuition about their body's needs. Gifts potentially developed over many lifetimes of learning. Understanding body memory also brings responsibility. If your body carries the accumulated wisdom and trauma of multiple lifetimes, treating it with reverence becomes even more important. The chronic condition you're dealing with might not be punishment. It could be your soul's way of finally healing something that's been carried for centuries. When working with healthcare providers, look for those open to exploring multiple factors in chronic conditions. Integrative doctors, chiropractors familiar with emotional release work, or acupuncturists who understand energy patterns might be more receptive to considering how past experiences could influence current physical challenges. Sometimes the body chooses specific challenges in this lifetime for profound reasons. A person born with mobility limitations might be learning patience and inner strength after lifetimes of relying on physical power. Someone dealing with chronic illness might be developing compassion and healing wisdom that will serve others. The key insight is that physical symptoms might not be random suffering, but meaningful experiences connecting to larger patterns of soul growth. Your body becomes not just a vessel for this lifetime, but a library of experiences, wisdom, and healing opportunities accumulated across multiple incarnations. When you begin viewing physical challenges through this lens, even difficult symptoms can become teachers rather than enemies. The pain might be asking for acknowledgement, the limitation might be developing new capacities, the chronic condition might be the final chapter in a healing story that began lifetimes ago. Your flesh remembers what your mind cannot, and in that remembering lies both the source of unexplained suffering and the key to profound healing. You walk into a room full of strangers, and across that space your eyes meet someone you've never seen before. But something impossible happens. Your entire body responds as if you're seeing someone you've been waiting for your whole life. Your heart races, your breath catches, and every cell in your being screams, "I know you." There's no logical explanation. You've never met this person, yet the recognition is so profound, so undeniable, that it feels like you're picking up a conversation that began centuries ago. This is soul recognition, and it's one of the most compelling signs that your consciousness has lived before. When we encounter certain people, we're not just meeting them for the first time, we're reuniting with souls who have traveled alongside us through multiple lifetimes, playing different roles in an eternal dance of growth, learning, and evolution. The phenomenon goes far beyond simple attraction or compatibility. Soul recognition creates an immediate sense of coming home, of finding a missing piece you didn't even know was lost. You might find yourself sharing your deepest thoughts with someone you met an hour ago, or feeling completely comfortable in a silence that would be awkward with anyone else. Sometimes you'll discover that you and this person have lived remarkably parallel lives, similar childhood experiences, identical timing on major life decisions, or unusual interests that seem to come from nowhere but align perfectly. But here's where it gets fascinating. Soul connections aren't always pleasant. Sometimes you'll meet someone and feel an immediate, intense dislike that seems completely disproportionate to anything they've actually done. You might find yourself in a power struggle with a coworker that feels like life or death, when objectively it's just about office supplies. These challenging connections often represent what researchers call karmic relationships, bonds formed to resolve conflicts or debts from previous lifetimes. I've studied thousands of cases where people describe meeting their current spouse and knowing instantly they would marry them, even when circumstances made it seem impossible. Others talk about children who seem wise beyond their years, as if they're old souls who chose their parents specifically. There are business partners who create incredible success together despite having completely different backgrounds, or friends who can communicate almost telepathically. The different types of soul connections each serve specific purposes. Soulmates aren't just romantic partners. They're souls who have agreed to support each other's growth across multiple lifetimes. Sometimes your soulmate shows up as your best friend, your mentor, or even your child. Soul families are larger groups that incarnate together, taking turns playing different roles. Your current mother might have been your daughter in a previous life. Your brother might have been your closest friend. Your spouse might have been your sibling. Then there are twin flames, souls that are essentially two halves of the same original consciousness. These connections are rare and incredibly intense. Twin flame relationships often involve periods of separation and reunion, as if the universe is orchestrating their timing for maximum growth and awakening. The connection is so powerful, it can be overwhelming, which is why many twin flame pairs don't end up together in every lifetime. Sometimes the energy is too intense for the human experience. What makes soul recognition so remarkable is how it manifests in practical ways. You might dream about someone before meeting them. You could have recurring synchronicities when you're together, meaningful coincidences that seem to confirm your connection. Some people report sharing memories that don't belong to their current lifetime, or having knowledge about each other that was never shared in conversation. Pay attention to your immediate emotional responses when meeting new people. That instant comfort or inexplicable hostility might be your soul recognizing someone from your past. Notice whether certain relationships feel destined, as if forces beyond your control conspired to bring you together. Track the patterns in the types of people you're consistently drawn to, the personality traits, life experiences, or even physical characteristics that seem to repeat across your most significant relationships. The challenging aspect of soul recognition is that these relationships often catalyze major life changes. Your soul family doesn't incarnate with you to make life easy. They come to help you grow, heal, and evolve. That might mean your soulmate challenges your limiting beliefs, your karmic partner forces you to confront your deepest fears, or your soul family creates situations that push you toward your highest potential. Understanding karmic relationships can transform your most difficult connections. That family member who pushes all your buttons might be helping you develop patience and forgiveness. The romantic partner who broke your heart might have been teaching you about self-worth and independence. The friend who betrayed you could be offering you lessons in discernment and boundaries. When you recognize these challenging relationships as spiritual contracts rather than random suffering, you can work with them more consciously. The timing of soul connections is rarely convenient from a human perspective, but it's always perfect from a soul perspective. You meet your twin flame when you're both married to other people. Your business soulmate appears just as your career is falling apart. Your karmic family incarnates together during the exact historical period when their collective healing can unfold. The universe orchestrates these meetings for maximum learning potential, not maximum comfort. Working consciously with soul relationships requires developing new skills. Meditation can help you understand the deeper purpose of your connections. Past life regression, whether through professional therapy or self-guided techniques, might reveal the history you share with significant people in your current life. Learning to communicate about soul-level connections carefully and appropriately can deepen your relationships and accelerate mutual growth. Forgiveness becomes crucial when you recognize that some of your most challenging relationships involve working through conflicts from previous lifetimes. That person who seems determined to make your life difficult might be unconsciously trying to balance something from centuries ago. Understanding this doesn't mean accepting abuse or unhealthy behavior, but it can provide context for healing and moving forward. The most profound realization that comes with recognizing soul connections is that every significant relationship in your life becomes a doorway to understanding your eternal journey. Your difficult boss, your challenging child, your ex-spouse, your best friend, they're all fellow travelers who have agreed to play specific roles in your consciousness evolution. Some come to teach, some to heal, some to challenge, and some to celebrate with you. When you begin to see your relationships through this lens, everything changes. Conflicts become opportunities for growth. Separations become natural transitions rather than failures. Love becomes less about possession and more about mutual evolution. You start to appreciate that the souls who love you enough to play the villain in your story deserve as much gratitude as those who play the hero. This recognition transforms not just how you relate to others, but how you understand your own purpose. You're not just here to live one isolated life. You're part of an eternal community of consciousness, learning and growing together across time and space, each lifetime offering new opportunities to love more deeply, forgive more completely, and evolve more fully. There's something profoundly unsettling about walking through modern life, feeling like you're wearing clothes that don't quite fit, not physically, but existentially. You look around at the world everyone else seems to navigate effortlessly, and something deep within you whispers, "This isn't home." If you've experienced that persistent sense of displacement we've been exploring throughout these signs, you're likely familiar with what I call the eternal outsider syndrome. It goes far beyond typical generational differences or personal quirks. This is a bone-deep recognition that your soul remembers other times, other places, other ways of being human. Consider Sarah, a software engineer who makes excellent money but finds herself crying in her car after work, not because her job is terrible, but because the entire concept of sitting in artificial light, staring at screens, disconnected from natural rhythms, feels like a betrayal of something essential within her. She dreams of working with her hands, of seasons dictating her schedule, of communities where everyone knows each other's names. Her friends think she's having a quarter-life crisis, but what if her soul is simply homesick for lifetimes spent in agricultural societies, where work meant something tangible and time moved with the sun? This displacement manifests in fascinating ways. You might find yourself inexplicably drawn to historical periods that feel more real than your current life. Not just interested in them academically, but feeling a pull so strong it's almost gravitational. You watch documentaries about medieval villages or Native American tribal life, and something in your chest tightens with recognition and loss. The modern dating world might feel impossibly shallow when your soul remembers lifetimes of arranged marriages that grew into profound partnerships, or communities where relationships were supported by extended networks rather than two people trying to be everything to each other. You're not old-fashioned. You're remembering different frameworks for human connection that actually worked. Environmental destruction doesn't just concern you intellectually, it causes a grief so deep it feels personal. Because maybe it is. If you've lived lifetimes in pristine forests, breathed air untainted by industrial pollution, known landscapes before they were paved, then watching the planet's degradation isn't just witnessing current events. It's watching your former homes disappear. Technology might overwhelm you in ways that seem disproportionate to your actual experience with it. While others embrace each new innovation, you feel increasingly fragmented, yearning for simplicity that your peers consider regression. Your nervous system, calibrated over multiple lifetimes to natural rhythms and face-to-face communication, struggles with the artificial stimulation of modern life. The career dissatisfaction runs deeper than typical job frustration. The entire structure of modern work, trading time for money, competing rather than collaborating, creating products that serve profit rather than genuine human need, might feel fundamentally wrong. Not because you're lazy or uncommitted, but because your soul remembers economic systems based on contribution, craftsmanship, and community benefit. You might find yourself drawn to ancient wisdom traditions with an intensity that surprises you. Reading about shamanic practices, Buddhist philosophy, or indigenous ceremonies doesn't feel like learning something new. It feels like remembering. The concepts click into place with an ease that suggests familiarity rather than discovery. Here's what's particularly important to understand. This displacement isn't a problem to be fixed. It's information to be honored. Souls who feel fundamentally out of step with current times, often incarnated specifically to serve as bridges between past wisdom and present needs. You're not broken, you're remembering. Think about the global challenges we're facing: environmental crisis, social fragmentation, spiritual emptiness, unsustainable economic systems. Who better to help navigate these issues than souls who remember when humans lived differently, when communities were intact, when people understood their connection to natural cycles, when spiritual practice was woven into daily life rather than compartmentalized into weekend activities. Your anachronistic values aren't outdated, they're timeless. The emphasis on community over individualism, sustainability over growth, wisdom over information, being over doing. These aren't primitive concepts. They're sophisticated understandings that modern society has temporarily forgotten. But here's the balance. Honoring past life memories doesn't mean rejecting current life opportunities. The goal isn't to retreat into nostalgia, or refuse to engage with present circumstances. Instead, it's about integrating the wisdom of other times into current challenges. How can you bring the community-building skills you remember into modern neighborhoods? How can ancient approaches to conflict resolution inform contemporary relationships? How can traditional ecological knowledge contribute to current environmental solutions? Start by researching the historical periods that call to you most strongly, not just surface-level exploration, but deep dives into how people actually lived, what they valued, how they organize their societies. Pay attention to which aspects resonate most deeply. Those might be clues to your past life experiences and current life mission. Find communities that honor traditional ways of being, permaculture groups, intentional communities, spiritual organizations that emphasize ancient practices, craft guilds that maintain traditional skills. These spaces often attract souls who remember other times. You'll likely find kindred spirits who share your sense of displacement and your vision for integrating old wisdom with new possibilities. Consider that your feelings of being an outsider might actually indicate being an insider to larger truths about human potential. While others are fully adapted to current systems, you maintain awareness of alternatives. This perspective, though sometimes painful, is precisely what's needed to help humanity evolve beyond its current limitations. The loneliness of feeling different can be transformed into the purpose of being different. Your soul didn't incarnate into this time period by accident. You're here because this is when your particular blend of ancient wisdom and current awareness is most needed. If this video resonated with you, let us know by commenting, "I understood it."